We are so excited to open this series with today's guest, a great leader in the FemTech space, Rachel Bartholomew. Rachel is the founder of FemTech Canada and HyIvy Health and has been involved in the startup community for more than 10 years, working in various roles in small business, venture capital, innovation labs, and ecosystem partnerships. Rachel is a graduate of the Master of Business Entrepreneurship and Technology program at the University of Waterloo and has worked as a professor in entrepreneurship for quantum computing, an analyst for a venture capital firm, an innovation manager at a large Canadian financial institution, and helped restart Laurier University's incubator program. Welcome to the show, Rachel.
Hi, thanks for having me.
We are so excited to learn all the things in today's podcast episode. But before we jump into the many, many questions Melanie and I have, give us a better sense of Rachel, HyIvy Health, FemTech Canada. Walk us through a little bit about.
Yeah, for sure. So, off the top of that introduction, when I was working at Laurier, running their ecosystem and incubator, my term had come up after a year. I was about 28 years old at the time, and I was diagnosed with cervical cancer. And it came out of left field for me. Obviously, you don't prepare for anything like that in your life. And so I kind of got thrown into the world of being a young woman with cancer. And so, April 2019, I was getting through diagnoses, and then I was on the operating table by June 2019. Through that process, learned so much about cancer care and how much we are lacking in that space. Actually came up with a number of startup ideas through that process. And I just decided, I saw an opportunity in a device that was handed to me when I was going through my treatment that's over 85 years old. And when I started to dig into the research, women were screaming about how much they hated this device. And God bless them, but the man from 1938 that created it, and not much has changed since then. It was ripe for innovation and disruption. So as I transferred from surgery to, bed rest and then waiting for further treatment, started conceptualizing an idea and then used my radiation treatments, which are in the hospital every single day. I am not a healthcare person. I just was a patient with an experience. So I was like, what better way to get feedback than to be in the hospital every single day and corner a doctor so that they can listen to me and pitch my idea? And so, I pitched it to a radiologist at the time. He shared it across, shared it to my oncologist. My oncologist called me in. I thought I was like not doing well in treatment or something. And she wanted to talk about what I was working on. And that was kind of the birth of HyIvy. We now are doing clinical trials in that cancer center with my oncologist, which is such a huge, wholesome, full circle moment. Lots of tears over the last little bit of just this, like, I'm no longer a patient, but now I'm here as an innovator. So it's been a really cool experience. But HyIvy essentially creates gynecological and pelvic health remote monitoring, therapeutics, and diagnostic devices. This is the device here. And so this conducts multiple therapies and has sensors integrated in, collecting a number of different data points that can be used medically for diagnosis. So we have been at this for about 4 years now. I passed through my 5-year diagnosis, so I'm now all clear and off the cancer train and on to the rest of the world. But in that process of creating HyIvy, I went out to fundraise, realized very quickly that I was dealing with questions that didn't feel right that were being asked from me from VCs, and started talking to the other life sciences ecosystem and asked them, hey, do you get questions like this? And they were saying, no, we don't have to talk to wives to get to the next step, that our problem is something that needs to be solved. And so really 2021, what happened was I needed some therapy, like some business startup therapy, and reached out to 51 companies at the time who were working across Canada in women's health. And I threw them all in the Slack channel selfishly and said, hey, let's help each other. And that was the start of FemTech Canada. FemTech Canada really just started as a Slack group that was connecting on a monthly basis. That morphed into the support of Innovation Factory to be able, one of the regional innovation centers in Hamilton, to be able to start operationalizing. And what's happened is we've had 54% year over year growth We are now at 170 plus women's health companies in our database that we're supporting. We're the third largest femtech ecosystem in the world, next to the UK and the US. And it's been wildfire what's happened over the last 2 years or so of development. Then I decided I don't have enough work to do. I need to also put another hat on, which was essentially creating femtech across borders. So I've now pulled together the ecosystem around femtech organizations across the globe. So we started at 20 countries that I had kind of met off the cuff here and there. And we have now grown to 74 countries across the globe. And we've helped establish about 11 to 12 net new organizations across the globe. And we're connecting on what are the big challenges we're seeing in women's health and how can we support each other in areas that our countries maybe have done better than others? And how can we help our femtech ecosystems explore other ecosystems from an export and development standpoint? So that has been my last 4 years.
Wow, incredible, Rachel. I feel like I could just listen to you talk for ages and like hear so much. I know you've learned so much on this journey.
Yeah.
I've heard you speak a few times, and uh, it's always really you bring a very refreshing and real take to everything that you share.
Thank
Now,
you.
just for those who are listening and didn't get to see what you're holding, can you describe what your device looks like to us?
Yeah, so it's essentially, it's hard to describe because we really wanted to like
That's a
reinvent the
tricky one.
wheel and not look like we wanted it to be, it's a medical device. We don't want it to be a toy. We don't want it to be anything. So I don't know. It looks like a space gun if you flip it upside down, like something from like Star Wars or I don't know. But essentially it's a device with a shaft that goes intervaginally. And it's got a full handle that actually wraps around in between the legs so that a control panel is facing the patient so they can actually see where they're at in the therapeutic process. So it looks scary. A lot of people ask me like what end goes in and I go, oh, God bless you if you can put that one in. But, I think part of it is just really listening to patients and trying to make something that was a lot more ergonomically friendly. So what you're probably picturing is probably not anything of what it looks like. And
Yeah, so
that's the
everyone go
purpose.
absolutely go watch this and check out what it looks like on HyIvy's website. I think like this touches on something really important, which is around something to speak to it with FemTech Canada, how healthcare research and services have really failed women for centuries. And you just spoke to how this technology, the previous technology that this is an iteration, massive iteration of, is over 80 years old. And so I was curious, I was kind of doing a thought experiment when I was looking into, listening to you speak in other spaces and thinking like if we were to have a crystal ball and an alternate reality and we're looking into that and we see Rachel Bartholomew's alternate reality from 5 years ago, where we do have that equitable distribution of healthcare research and services for women, what would Rachel's journey have looked like these past 5 years? So what could that beautiful alternate reality look like?
My gosh, there's so much to say there. I mean, in a perfect world, that 30 plus years being behind in fundamental research wouldn't exist. We would have the research. And I think, one of the things we really struggled with is nobody stuck sensors in this area before. When we're doing the ergonomics of what our device looked like, we only just in the last, I think it was 2 or 3 years, had proper anatomical models in textbooks for women's gynecological like area. So how do we know what to make and how to make it and how to make a good experience when we have zero data to work off of? And so, for us, I think we could have moved a lot faster. I believe that we would have been taken a lot more seriously because then, with data, with appropriate education to our doctors, with all of these things, the industry starts to catch up. And what happens is investors and other players and corporates look at this as the big opportunity that it really is. It's 51% of the population. So sorry, men, we outnumber you. It really, we could have moved faster. We could have had more resources. We could have had all these things. But unfortunately, we're playing so much catch up. And a lot of the companies, unfortunately, and researchers and everybody else who works in this ecosystem is doing the foundational work to try to unlock these questions that we just don't have answers to yet. And so for us, that required us to get really weird about how we created a product and tested things and like hacked together prototypes to gather the data that we needed to make better assumptions and hypotheses about what are the requirements in a product that we want to bring to market. So I think we could have moved a lot faster with a lot more resources if we had a perfect world.
And how would you describe Canada? I mean, it's so interesting that you have so much international work. So I'm sure you're reflecting on Canada juxtaposed against the global stage. How would you actually describe the FemTech community and the ecosystem in Canada today? And with all this political uncertainty, all of these, this interesting cast of characters that we see coming forward, what's your gut sense of where we're at now?
Oh, it's such an interesting question. And initially your question was, what's one word? And all I could think of is thriving. And I actually have it like tattooed on me, thrive. Truly thriving. And the thing is through all the work that we're doing with the government, with corporate, with all of these people who are starting to get excited. And I think that's the biggest thing is we've created the ecosystem and now the momentum is starting. People are asking questions. They're coming to us. They want to be involved. That is the exciting piece. It's thriving from the work that these companies are doing themselves. They are high growth, high potential, high everything. Like these companies, even though they're net new, are already on market, are making money, are making waves, are not just leading their companies, but also are leaders in advocating for women's health in their respective areas. Like these women and a couple men have really taken on the role of educating the world in what they're working on and advocating for that. And so when we were pulling together all the information about the ecosystem for our government to tell them a little bit more about what we were doing, I did all that work myself. I just researched every single company and I pulled together that with the limited resources, limited money, like we haven't raised that much money collectively as companies, but yet we've hired over 1,200 people into staff. We've filed over 60 patents. We've got like well over 70 plus both research projects and 70 plus commercialization products going out to market. Like they've done this with nothing. And that just shows the resilience, the capabilities, how smart our femtech ecosystem is and how much it can thrive if we were to just put some more gasoline on the fire. That's really been my role is like, how can I get more gasoline for the fire? How can I herd the cats and be a place where people can start to connect around this ecosystem? And it has grown exponentially over the past 2 years. And it's even riper to grow even further.
Amazing. Thank you. I love that. How do we put gasoline on the fire?
Yeah.
And you're speaking to yourself as well as these other women in the FemTech Canada community and how they are thriving within this kind of space that still we are coming up against the bias and stigma. And I've heard you speak about how the stigma runs deep in not only with investors, but also with doctors and patients. And we know, our experiences as the patients, and we know that tools, technology are not keeping up and it's uncomfortable. And why are we having to put up with these things? And people such as yourself and all of those women and the 1,800 femtech women or women in femtech out there who are building companies, and the thousands more hopefully to come, they're coming up against these barriers and walking into these rooms with male investors and talking about vaginas and seeing their faces do things. And I'd love to know, when you're working with, or when you're speaking to other women in the femtech community, the FemTech Canada community and beyond, what kind of tips you have in mind when you're talking to those who are walking into those rooms and are facing that kind of dearth of research and are getting frustrated with that, are facing burnout with that, are struggling in those spaces? How do you help them kind of manage the, like, how to pitch and present myself, how to continue to walk into those rooms day after day? I hear those kind of questions come up a lot with founders that we're working with, and I'm curious, with your insider perspective, what you would say to them.
Yeah. So, I mean, the first thing in all of this is that the stigma runs deep into the full infrastructure that is healthcare. And I think that that is from, how we teach sex ed as children, to how our doctors are educated, to then how they go on and treat patients, and then how patients are viewed, throughout their process. It's everyone's fault and it's no one's fault at the same time. And I think all that we need to do is to continue to talk about these things and educate. And it's frustrating. I'm telling you, it is the most frustrating thing to walk into a room and to have nobody be able to connect with what you're trying to talk about. But it's the work that we almost have to do when we step into these roles, and not to put that weight on anybody's shoulders who wants to get into this ecosystem, but look at it as the opportunity that you are the person that potentially goes in and teaches somebody something new that they've never known. And even if they're shut off, you'd be surprised how many earworms come out of that education piece that opens up that next conversation. It's really funny. I had a co-op student who, when I first onboarded him, I was like, yeah, these are all the things that women deal with. And we don't talk to our mothers, who are like the perfect opportunity to talk about these things with. And he actually went home and sat his mother and his grandmother down and asked them questions about their health, and learned for the first time about all of these different things that his mother was going through, and actually was going through surgery, but wasn't explaining what was happening to him. And it completely changed his relationships. And like, these are the types of conversations that have to happen. Yes, there's stigma, but the more that we educate and the more that we put that word out there, we say the word vagina and people don't cringe and it becomes normal place, those barriers start to break down. And I think part of the way that I go about it is I lead with my story. And I know that a lot of people say women don't need to have a story to be taken seriously. And I totally agree with that. Women can make badass, sorry if I swear, businesses without having to openly share about their stories. But I openly share because what happens is, when I openly share that story, it brings out this level of vulnerability. It breaks down a wall to say, hey, I'm being vulnerable with you. I want you to be vulnerable back to me. And it's been interesting because I've been able to bridge a lot of barriers with our traditional, VCs. Picture a VC of what you would see, and that's, who you'd be sitting across the table with. And we start having conversations about orgasms and vaginas and all these things that, like, they probably wouldn't have. And I hope they go home and, have with others in their lives. And it's really interesting because then they can share, hey, like, I don't have a connection to this. I don't really know much about this. And so there's almost like this back and forth vulnerability that allows to say, hey, there's stigma here. There's, a little bit of uncomfortableness here, but if you're vulnerable and I'm vulnerable, we can work through this together. And that's how I really approached it. I think the other thing is too, is once again, we're creating businesses. A business is a business all the way through. And it's how you present it in the way that you pitch. Be strong, be confident. We talk about all these things with women, getting challenged more in their pitches and stuff like that. And as you do more and you practice more, you get more confident in it. But stick to your numbers, know your gut, know, your market model. Obviously, if people point out vulnerabilities, you say, yes, but I've done XYZ. Like, you answer it like a true leader does. No one can argue that. It's good business, right? And I think that that's the biggest piece of, like, we don't have to so much wrap it around women's health and stigma and having that conversation. It can also be a good business conversation at the end of the day. So, those are a couple of the points that I always tell others to focus in on. And yeah, once again, that heavy lifting on the education piece, it's tough. We wear a heavier load than a lot of other life sciences and other companies have to, but every single person that I've met we're starting to spread. We're starting to spread that word. And I think it sounds very culty. I don't know why. But we're starting to spread that word, and I'm starting to come across investors who are like, I met this person and I'm really excited. And it's like, okay, if it's not me to get someone excited, and it's not the next femtech company, but it's the next femtech company that gets them excited. It's this full circle moment. So I think, yeah, I would say go in knowing your numbers and being really passionate and strong about the education piece. But I see every single person who gets into this ecosystem really passionate about that piece of it and can do such a fantastic job with it.
I think that's part of what makes the stats that we see coming back so maddening around, women's investment in general, even if it's going to, femtech companies, et cetera, that the potential profitability, the business models, the leadership that's coming from these women, all the boxes are checked in creating scalable, sustainable, unbelievable businesses. Why is that not resulting in a more equitable landscape of where funding is being allocated, where the growth is happening? And I love your positivity that there's great movement coming from all these different conversations. And you're right, it might not be your business, but it might be the business that comes after you, that investors might be cracked open a little bit more and be more receptive and understand some of these pain points that are being tried to be solved through some of these products and offerings. Underneath that bias, like, what else do we have to do? Because I feel, I've been having these conversations as a podcast host through my Startup Canada hat for years, that we see so much potential and clear. I even hesitate using the word potential because it's more than that. Like, these businesses deserve to be invested in, but we're not seeing fast enough progress in getting those founders the capital that they need to build globally competitive businesses that solve very important problems. There's, all these competing factors that contribute to that. What else can we be doing? And I also hesitate putting this back on the shoulder of women. It's our responsibility to bring the numbers and do all this as well. Yes, we need to come with all those ammunition points and proof points, as any entrepreneur needs to come into those conversations with. But how else do we change this? Like, what are the other levers? And, we've got a huge men audience on this podcast as well. We've got great calls to action we can put out there. What else do we need to actually create an ecosystem where that number isn't 2% of VC funding going to women? And, even 10%, what would that look like? 20%, not asking for even equity at this point, because that just feels so wild. What else do we have to do at this moment in time to start moving that dial meaningfully?
That's such a...
Just a little question.
I'm looking for this answer.
Yeah. I know this has been a conversation that has been had time and time again. I know that those numbers ebb and flow. I've heard 20% now with new numbers. I've heard it go backwards. I've heard, FemTech in itself is like 1.3%. So, it's in terms of the women conversation, I think part of it is, once again, back to, women interested in entrepreneurship and our society being able to support women in entrepreneurship through starting families and having the support and the resources and all of these things, to who's entering the ecosystems that, spur out entrepreneurs, STEM and business and stuff. You don't have the same amount of numbers of women. So we're not going to get the same number of women entering and feeling, open to entering these spaces. But then we also have to have spaces that allow women to feel supported in things like our incubator systems and that type of thing. And I think we're doing a good job of that in Canada. And I think there's still more to be said. And I'm afraid that we're going to go backwards in the next little bit, but we'll see based off the political climate. So, the women conversation, I think, is always going to be a conversation as we ebb and flow, taking one step forward and two steps back with everything that's happening in the world. And it's economic, it's cultural, it's political. There's so many underlyings to it. In terms of FemTech, the one thing that we need is time. And I say time because, A, I know that we have massive opportunities that we're trying to solve. B, we haven't been at it long enough. The term femtech only was coined, back in 2016. And there was 2 companies that identified themselves as femtech at that time. So when you think about that, our ecosystem, like fintech, climate tech, crypto bros, whatever it is, hasn't existed for very long. And so those who were identifying that this is a potential industry opportunity, and then B, those who are trying to enter into that ecosystem or are building in the ecosystem, we have not had enough time to become unicorns, to have IPOs, to have the groundwork that is needed from the scale that investors look to in order to say, this is a thriving ecosystem. And part of that just requires time. And especially because it is healthcare. Like at the end of the day, we're talking about healthcare ecosystems. Healthcare is slow, healthcare is hard, healthcare has barriers, and a lot of that takes time to penetrate. So I think part of it is if we have the time to be able to get more of us out there, more of us that are getting boots on the ground, having healthy, thriving businesses that are then moving towards the indicators that investors are looking for to be able to say, let's pump resources, let's get around this and let's get excited. And we're starting to see that in things like Flow and Maven and, Everlywell and all of these different companies. We're going to have more of those pop out. And, just for some stats, FemTech has grown like 300% over the last 5 years or something ridiculous like that. And we weathered, the COVID storm. We're weathering and trying to do what we can to weather the political storm. I think that momentum is there and we're going to see a lot more happening. But once again, we're 1,800, 1,900 companies globally that are in FemTech. And just alone in the United States, there's over 20,000 FinTech companies, so financial technology companies. So just for some comparison, I mean, I guess finance hits everybody, but half of the world's population, there's only 1,800 companies trying to solve these problems, and they're big problems that utilize the healthcare ecosystem substantially. Like, we just need time to build, time to execute, and time to deliver. And you will see this change and this atmosphere and this ecosystem change over time.
Yeah, really interesting. I'm hearing this like time story, right? At the same time in my brain, I keep thinking about you saying like, how do we throw gasoline on the fire? It's like, how do these two pieces go together? How do we make those two, meet? And I was thinking about like, we wanted to congratulate you because you were also named one of the 200 trailblazing leaders in women's health and femtech, which is amazing. So how do we get the next 200 in front of that we all know everyone's name of, like how do we do that? I know this is a really big question, but like, where does that, like, how do we, that tension of like needing the gasoline on the fire here with the like just needing time. Oh, do you have any kind of like pearls of wisdom for us? Any ideas, anything you've been thinking about in the shower about like what's the like that tension? How do we navigate that? And how can we as the ecosystem supporters, all three of us here today, how can those of us in the ecosystem contribute? Like what is one step we could each take this year, this month, this week, this day?
For sure. So I think, those 200 trailblazing women, I mean, those are women I look up to. They're role models. They're companies who are boots on the ground, like AOA, who is killing it in the ecosystem. And I think, like I said, the more that we have those that are the golden children of femtech and are doing fundamental science and important work that it's hard to ignore, and have done it so well, the more that we have those, the more that this is going to keep going. And some things that we can do, I mean, in those 200 women are also women I work with at FemTech Across Borders. They are innovation ecosystem players who came from all different corners, from universities to hospital systems to, other big tech companies who've identified these things. And a lot of them are very early on in their resource development of supporting femtech, right? We're just starting to get boots on the ground. So I think the more that we can amplify those voices, share the stories, share your personal stories, share the resources, create space for safe conversations for people who are building in this space and really leveraging that. And I think part of what we've been doing at FemTech Canada is also trying not to gatekeep. And I think what we're seeing now is with the momentum and the spark that we've created, our hopes is that, and what we're starting to see is groups like MedTech with a Q in Quebec, starting their own funding program around FemTech. Like we've been helping, but they started that on their own, right? We've had the France ambassadors come to us and say, let's do a CTA program where FemTech companies go to France. Like these are the things that just with that spark, we can start to see things start to shape up, and we don't need to be at the helm of that. It can be a group conversation, and there's a lot of really great power players in this space that can continue to that work. It's really interesting. Ida Tin, who coined the term femtech, when we first started meeting on Femtech Across Borders, she shared this video. It's a TED Talk, and it's a woman who studies trees, like forestry. And she talked about how in a forest, there is a mother tree. And the mother tree are the big trees that you see that like 10 people have to wrap their arms around to get around the circumference of this tree. And what they found was that these trees were actually supplying knowledge, wisdom, and resources through the roots underground to all the other little trees that were growing up in the forest. Yes, right? And it's right. It's so powerful. And like, I mean, I am also like such a nature girly, but this notion of like, if we can have someone who is the mother tree that can spark these little things and provide little nuggets throughout the ecosystem, we can start to have trees forming and forming their own little ecosystems. And that is the biggest thing that we need as women, as people who are working in femtech. And as a startup ecosystem, I think, as we support women and as we support these other growing industries, we start to support the overall ecosystem in tech and startups. So my hopes is that these resources start to spur and that momentum continues. And we're seeing it. It's just, once again, it's time. We're still very young and everyone's just learning still and getting going. But that snowball is starting to turn into an avalanche, and I'm excited for it. So
these metaphors are just, we're going snowballs, we're going trees, we're going all over the place.
Yes.
I love it. And I think Rachel is our resident mother tree. Like you are the physical manifestation of that, Rachel. You're
I'm one
sharing
of them.
wisdom. No, I mean to us in this conversation and everything that you're doing and your leadership in Canada, like you are this mother tree. And it's so encouraging to see you serve as this role model to all of these future femtech leaders, and knowing that you are a source of information. No information is being gate kept. Like that spirit builds so much collaboration and trust and an energy that then they pass down to other entrepreneurs in their network. And we need more of that in entrepreneurship. Yeah. And yes, protect your ideas, all those good things as well, but share the experience, because it's so freaking lonely to go through this by yourself.
It's funny you say that. So part of the work we did at HyIvy for our branding was, how do we want to, represent ourselves as a brand? And it was my head of marketing, Susan Stover, who came up with this vibe that she says, like, I give off, and HyIvy is supposed to give off. And it's great auntie vibes. So great auntie is like the person you come to who's like the coolest, has the great stories, is like a little bit weathered in the fact that she's like been through it and been through the trenches, like has the stories, but also is like going to give you the tools and give you the ability to go off and like fly, little butterfly, fly, And so it's funny. I try to lean into that so much. It's like, I'm not here to gatekeep. I'm here to just like spread the wisdom, herd the cats, and, pull everyone together and tell a couple funny stories, I guess, along the way.
I love that. And maybe like pulling on that a little bit, if you think of the other little trees that are sort of around you right now, and just where you're seeing this momentum. You mentioned the France government being really interested in, bringing femtech companies over to France, and these almost like hot spots, both in the Canadian ecosystem and internationally. Yeah. For folks that are raising, you did a $2 million seed funding round with HyIvy. That process, where did you see your energy kind of flowing? Where did you see appetite? Was it, with particular types of investors? Was it regionally in specific spots? Was it with government players? Like, walk us through where you saw some of that momentum bringing you.
Oh, that's a hard conversation, because We raised a pre-seed round initially in 2021. And in 2021, like, I feel like an old person now because I'm like, remember the days of 2021 when investors were investing in anything and everything and
Napkins,
valuations were high and blah,
everything,
blah,
free
blah.
for all.
Yeah, like it truly felt that way. I mean, I was very blessed in that I didn't have a quick raise in my pre-seed, but I got a good group of investors who have now invested in us multiple times, and I'm very thankful for that. I don't know how I could have done it if I had waited. Now going into 2022 and political and economic and SVB and all of these other things that have happened in the world, it's tough out there right now. Just to give some context, and I'm so open about these things, it took me about 9 months to raise my pre seed round. And that was, you know, an idea, validated idea, early prototypes, but nothing really set in stone, still trying to figure out clinicals and regulations and all this stuff. And, this seed round has taken almost 2 years to close. And I've had investors come back in. I'm very blessed for that, trying to bring new faces to the table, but it has not been easy. And I think if anything, it is not a reflection on the companies. It's a reflection on where we're at in the life cycle. I think these things will change and I think these things will stabilize eventually. I don't know when. People keep saying it's 2024 and it's like now it's 2025 and we're still on this roller coaster ride. So initially it took me a hundred no's to get my first yes. Or no, it was about 60 no's, I think, until my first yes in my pre-seed. I think I'm well into 400-500 no's. Like it takes that much more work, that much more effort. You have to get crafty. You have to make your resources stretch. You have to think about going at things a different way and maybe scaling back a bit in order to get the proof points to get people excited. And, that for me, it becomes a huge issue because med tech is so hard without capital to be able to get off the ground, especially med tech that's hardware. I don't want to say it. I don't know if I'll ever do this again because it is so hard and people don't like hardware. It is a huge thing, especially in Canada. I don't know what happened, but we're all just B2B SaaS girlies. And, I feel like we need to like diversify a little bit, but it's stick with it, talk with as many people as you can, get out there, build your network beyond Canada and beyond your little local ecosystem. Our lead investor is this amazing company out of Italy that I met through the CTA group, the Canadian Trade Commissioners group out of Italy. And they've been with us since the beginning. Zambon Group is their name. Like, you just have to kind of get out and start talking and build that network and keep asking who else should you talk to. I think that's one thing that we always fail at is we get a denial. I know I'm this person, and this is like any salesperson listening is probably like, oh my gosh, sales 101. When somebody says no, you don't shut down and go cry in a corner, which I totally do all the time. You go, okay, when can I come back and who else can I talk to? Like keep that resource flow going. And I think when once you've heard enough no's, you're like, just like, oh, it's another no, like whatever. Tell me somebody else and let me talk to them, right? You get so good at getting used to that process. But it's a lot of effort and it's a lot of time. So being able to really carve out time to take care of yourself. Hearing negatives and no's all the time is so difficult to deal with mentally. I always say it's like you have your baby and you're like showcasing your baby and you're like, isn't my baby so cute? And then they're like, your baby's really ugly. And you're like, thank you. Who else can I talk to? Can I reach back out and who do I talk to? Exactly.
Oh,
Can
yeah.
I reach back out when you think my baby's maybe cuter? So, I think it's tough, right? So, giving ourselves a little bit of grace through that process and being okay with it's okay to have. We weren't recording, but at the top of this hour, I said this was CEO nap day and I was napping before this podcast, and it's okay to have a nap. Naps are great, take
Heck
care
yeah.
of yourself.
It's okay
through
to
that
have a
process.
nap. I think that should be the motto. CEO motto, it's okay to have a nap. Amazing. Oh my goodness. I feel like we've learned so much from you. Like Kayla, as you said, the mother tree or like the great auntie. I love the great auntie. That's like when I was asking you, what can we all do like today or this month or this year? Like, let's just embody some more great auntie and
Yes.
channel that a little bit and yeah, like be vulnerable and share our, what we're going through on that personal and business journeys and, soak in all of this great wisdom that you're sharing with us and think about who else can I talk to and how can I
Yeah.
widen the net. And even if I'm just thinking about my solution in this one like area, how about I ask like where else could this potentially apply? And like I think there's so much great wisdom there. And I would love to ask though, with coming back to FemTech Canada, it's such an incredible space that you're able to champion all these, women, girls, non-binary folks, trans people, and those assigned female at birth, everyone, you're able to champion what their needs, wants, all the things. And it's been a year now that FemTech Canada has been with us, so just over a year, which is incredible. And channeling that great auntie, I'd love to hear a little bit of like looking back over the last year, what are you most proud of? What are we celebrating here today? And I'd love to kind of get into that juicy bit there.
Yeah, for sure. I think, yeah, so I mean, we've really been at this about 2 years, and this past year has really been the build year. Initially it was kind of like, let's figure out what we want to build. And a part of that was tapping into the ecosystem that existed and going, what do you need? Right. And talking to every player that we can. And now this year has been, let's start building and let's showcase and put our kind of stake in the ground that we're here. And I think the traction that we've made has been incredible. My team is incredible at FemTech Canada, and being able to get the word out there, to have large conversations happening, to have large players at the table, to have met Prime Minister's office and all of these big players at the government level who all are saying the work that we're doing is so important and that they want to support it. I'm so proud of what we've been able to accomplish through that. But I think most importantly, what I'm so proud of is the growth that we've seen in femtech. The women who are leaning in, who are quitting their jobs, who are taking that risk and going, I want to innovate in this space and I want to make a change. And a lot of it coming around personal stories that they're also openly sharing, and starting to get these momentum and conversations on social media where some of this stigma can lie and misinformation can lie, and just really just leaning into educating that ecosystem. And I create the vessel, but they all make it work. And I am so proud of every single company that we have in our ecosystem because they contribute, they actively show up, they do hard work, they are knowledgeable, they are educated, and they advocate, and they all really truly encompass that great auntie vibe. They want to support and they want to continue passing that torch on. And I'm seeing it more and more, and I'm seeing more young students starting to get excited about this space and doing their capstone projects on this stuff. Researchers who are like leaning in and going, I'm going to take down the university and showcase, that like 98% of their clinical trials haven't been properly conducted. These are the foundational pieces of work that move that needle. We're just here to support them in that process. They're the ones really doing the real hard work. And gosh, I'm so proud. I'm so proud of the growth we've had. I'm so proud of the team, and I'm so proud of the core work that these companies have done, and the people that maybe don't have a company but are doing that research work and that ecosystem work to try to make this happen as well. We're starting to corral, and I think that that's the thing that I'm most excited about.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. Thank you so much, Rachel, for joining us on the Startup Canada podcast today. Melanie, my co-host for today, thank you for asking such fabulous questions and for being a part of this conversation. I think we've got some great CTAs coming right out of this podcast episode.
Yeah.
Rachel provided context at the beginning around the 2025 budget and making sure that further research and innovation is recognized by the Canadian government and supported through some of their recommendations and funding. So love everyone to go and sign that petition and really support FemTech Canada there. Rachel, we will be following your entrepreneurial journey, your ecosystem journey, all the journeys that you're on. And we are so lucky to have a champion in you to be really raising this flag and showcasing the unbelievable potential that this space has and what unbelievable businesses are going to come out of this space. Like, it is really, really encouraging. We need people like you to keep charging forward, because this isn't easy. So we appreciate all the hard work that you are doing behind closed doors, in front of other doors, outside, inside, all the different spaces. So thanks for doing what you do.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for giving me a platform to chat about it.
It's a privilege.